Bonjour and bienvenue to Tom Rhodes Smart Camp. I am speaking to you now from the Regent's Garden Hotel in Paris, France. I'm about a 10-minute walk from the Arc de Triomphe. And those of you who know me know that I'm a Francophile. I love French culture. I love French people. I love France. And Paris is my favorite city in the world. Well, how did this become my favorite city in the world? Let's walk through a little Tom Rhodes history and why I love Paris so much. So my mother is from Buenos Aires, Argentina, and everyone in my family took Spanish, which seems like, the logical language to study when you're in high school. My senior year of high school, I chose to study French. I took French, and it was an elective class. You had one class you could choose. Most people did gym or like power mechanics, an easy class. But I actually wanted to learn French, so I chose French. And the woman who taught the class at my high school was actually the Spanish teacher. She wasn't. There was like one French class that she taught. And, I had kind of a reputation because I wanted to be a comedian. I was always making jokes. And on day one of this class, this woman made me sit, and there was a lot of cute girls in the class too. It was kind of humiliating and embarrassing. On the first day, she said, Tom, I want you to sit in this front seat right in front of my desk because I heard you were trouble and I want to keep my eye on you. So, I really worked my ass off in that class, and I really put an effort into it. And this woman gave me a D, which is one above failing. If you're outside of the United States, who knows what the grading system is anymore? But D is one above failing, and if you had like 2 Ds on your report card, you couldn't play sports. So I actually failed off of the varsity baseball team, which was, a great accomplishment. I loved baseball. It was really important to me. And I remember going to speak to this woman and asking her if she could change that D to a C. And I told her I had put an effort into the class. And she wouldn't change it. So I failed off the baseball team. And anywho, still pisses me off when I think about it to this day. So fast forward to when I was 20 years old, I moved to New York City. It was one of the worst years of my life. I was completely broke. I was living in Washington Heights, 1987, as crack was coming to the neighborhood. And I struggled. I was broke. And I remember I was eating like, one thing of roast pork fried rice a day because it cost like $1.50 at this Chinese restaurant down the street. And I moved back to Florida when I was 21, basically to, lick my wounds and regroup. And I was living in a house in Winter Park, Florida on Fairbanks Avenue. And the house was on Little Lake Fairbanks. And it was a really fun time. A couple of the guys that lived in the house were musicians, and we water skied every day, smoked a lot of pot, and then I was touring the South. I was doing the Southern circuits, and I was happy to have work as a comedian and just throwing myself into the adventure of chasing this dream. So I came back off the road. I had been gone for, a couple weeks, a month, who knows what it was. And I walk into the backyard of this house that was on Little Lake Fairview, or Little Lake Fairbanks, whatever it was. And there was a beautiful topless French woman sunbathing in the backyard. And her name was Natalie. And she had been a former girlfriend of one of the guys in the band. And she was from Paris. And she was back in Florida visiting. And with her mother, and I got together with her. We fell in love, and I remember us skinny dipping as the sunrise was coming up on Little Lake Fairview. So she went back to Paris. We wrote each other romantic letters, and I told her that I wanted to move to San Francisco, that I had always felt like a higher intelligence of comedy came out of there, and I needed to move somewhere to, for like comedy university, basically, to reach that next level in development. And Natalie said, I love you, and I will go with you anywhere. So she flew back from Paris to Florida when the time was ready. And we moved to San Francisco in my 1978 Cadillac Sedan DeVille. This is 1990. And I remember I had like $800 in my pocket and everything fell into place. We got an apartment on Fulton Street. What was it? 1096 Fulton Street. And little tiny place, and little by little we got furniture. And I remember her mother came and visited. And her mother, Anique, God, I loved this woman. And she was so cool. And she wanted to, she had never been to California before. So the first time she came to visit us in San Francisco, I planned this big trip to the Grand Canyon. And we go to the Grand Canyon. And when you go to the Grand Canyon, there's this one spot where you can hike 2 miles down into the canyon. And she, like a lot of French people at the time, chain smoked filterless gouloirs. And me, as a cigarette smoker, one filterless gouloir, I would need to lay down and take a nap. This cigarette was so incredibly strong. So she was complaining about chest pains, and I'm thinking, oh, Jesus Christ, I don't want to, you don't want to kill the mother when you're in a relationship. That's going to haunt you and come back in every argument you're ever going to have in the future. Oh, yeah, well, you killed my mother. I was trying to show her the Grand Canyon. So if you've been to the Grand Canyon, it's like 2 miles straight down hike. It's easy. It's all downhill. Donkeys are singing. Everybody's happy. But coming back up is straight up 2 miles. And it was getting dark, and she's complaining about her chest, and she'd sit down and smoke. And at one point, and I'm telling Natalie, I said, hey, tell your mom, we need to get to the top before the dark. And at one point, she put one hand on her heart and held one hand to the sky like Fred Sanford in Sanford and Son. And she didn't speak any English. This must have been the only English word she knew. She starts going, helicopter, helicopter. This woman, from watching American television, thought anyone in trouble in the United States could summon a helicopter at any time. But we eventually made it to the top. She didn't die, thank God. And I had a wonderful relationship with this woman. I'll tell you more about her in a minute. But I remember the first time I came to Paris with Natalie was 1992. And Natalie grew up in the Bastille area, and that's where her mother lived, in the same apartment where she grew up. And only about 5 blocks from Père Lachaise Cemetery, which is where Jim Morrison is buried, Oscar Wilde, Chopin, everybody, all these cool people. And at the time, I was the hugest Doors fan in the world. I wanted to be Jim Morrison, the Jim Morrison of comedy. Thank God I didn't, because he died at 27. And I remember I used to only wear cowboy boots back then. And I had this, were they Lucchese or Tony Lama, something like that. And they had been resold a couple times, and the bottom was worn out. And I went over one morning, and I remember I put the boots on Jim Morrison's grave. A few years later, they would implement where there would be a guard. Like now you go there and there's like some barriers around Jim's grave, and there's a guard on duty at all time. But I put these in my little ceremony to Jim Morrison. I put these boots on his grave, and then went and walked around for like another 30 minutes and came back, and they were gone. So somebody in Paris was wearing those cool-ass old worn-out boots that I had dropped. But the big thing that happened, God, there was a couple things that happened on that trip. Natalie's mother, I remember I brought her when she came to San Francisco, I also took her to a Giants baseball game. And she wanted to eat a hot dog. And then she had asked me if I could bring her a Louisville Slugger bat. And I brought that bat. And she kept it by her door for safety. And I remember going to visit her through the years and always seeing this Louisville Slugger bat by her door. But her and Natalie turned me on to, she was a big Voltaire fanatic. She would put her hand on her heart and say, Voltaire, when she would mention his name, Voltaire. And still to this day, one of my top 3 favorite books of all time is Candide by Voltaire. If you haven't read it, read it. It's a thin book. One of the greatest books ever. And then also she was really into Arthur Rimbaud. So Natalie's mother took me on the train to Charleville, France, which is near the Champagne region. I remember we stopped off in Reims, and we had a glass of Veuve Clicquot champagne. It was important that I drink this champagne there, and then and then that was my favorite beverage ever. Even though I stopped drinking alcohol 11 years ago, I would still put that up there as one of my favorite beverages. It's got the orange label. And then we got on the train, and then we went to Charleville to go to Arthur Rimbaud's grave. And we put flowers on his grave. And it was, a pretty cool little pilgrimage. So I got into Rimbaud and Voltaire, and that kind of started my love of French culture. Oh, and then this radio station, Radio Nova, she had it on all the time on the little boombox in her apartment. And it was really eclectic. They would play, French rap, old American R&B, soul, salsa music, just world music. And I still listen to Radio Nova Vintage on the Radio Garden app. But the big thing that happened on that trip, the first time I came to Paris in 1992, was Natalie got sick one night. Oh, in the Bastille area. If you don't know Paris, it's kind of like the Greenwich Village of Paris. It's like one of the coolest neighborhoods. And Natalie got sick one night, and I got to go out by myself in Paris. Oh my God. So I'm walking around the Bastille area, and I come upon this street called the Rue de Lappe, which there was just tons of bars on the street. Lively, people drinking, laughter. And I come upon this, I see this bar called Some Girls, and they only played the Rolling Stones, and I love the Rolling Stones. I've gone back, I've popped in there through the years, and they don't only exclusively play the Rolling Stones now. It's all just a mix of rock and roll classics. But at the time, they only played the Rolling Stones, and I was absolutely in heaven. I'm sitting at the bar. I'm writing in my little notebook ideas that are coming to me. It was the first time I'd ever drank Leffe, this beer that it used to be brewed by monks. I'm not sure if it's exclusively made by monks anymore, but every time I wanted to leave, they'd play another cool Rolling Stones song. Can You Hear Me Knockin'? Gimme Shelter, and then I'd order another beer. I mean, I was just really enjoying my own company. It was fantastic. So finally, I leave this bar, and the Rue de Lappe is this thin Parisian street, and it was raining, so the street was pretty empty now. And as I'm walking down the Rue de Lappe, I see these two men way off in the distance, and one of them was walking. It was like he had a crutch. He was walking like he had this walking brace. And as we get closer, I moved over to give them room to pass, and then they moved over towards me. And then I moved over a little bit more, and they moved over a little bit more. And then the next thing I knew, they were right up on me, and it wasn't a crutch. It was like a metal pole that the guy was pretending was some kind of crutch. And then they come up on me, and the dude jams me in the stomach with this metal pole. And it's go time, baby. It's 2 against 1. And I don't know where it came from. I barked at them. Ruff! And then dude with the pole started wailing on me. But fortunately, it was winter. It was in December. And I had a big, thick coat on. So it actually didn't hurt too bad. But then I looked to see what dude number 2 was doing. And dude number 2 maced me right in the eyes. And talking to people about this through the years, there's no guns in France. So I heard this is a technique that people will do. They'll mace you and then beat you up and get you on the ground and take your money. So a guy maces me. And I freaked out and I wailed my arms and I broke free and I just started sprinting away. And as I'm running, this like incredible amount of pain starts shooting in my eyes. I never felt such excruciating pain before. It was absolute agony. And then I'm running and I get down to the end of the street and I look back to see if they were chasing me, and they were not. They were obviously confused. They were probably saying to themselves, did that guy just fucking bark at us? But I got down to the end of the road, and it's amazing the things that stuck in the cracks of your brain. I looked back and I yelled, "Enchanté," which means nice to meet you. So that teacher I had in high school can go fuck herself, because I retained enough French to say nice to meet you after I was maced on the streets in Paris. I bet there were kids that got A's in that class who never got to apply their French on the streets of Paris, but I did. But even though I was maced the first time I came to Paris, I absolutely fell in love with the place, everything. The history is exciting, and the French Revolution has become one of my historical obsessions. I'll get more into that in a minute. And just crepes, and I like people are fashionable here. You know, even the garbage men wear like kind of, stylish looking pants. And I like the ethnicity. I like the embracing of different cultures that were a part of the French Empire that are all living in Paris now. Okay, let's talk about the Eiffel Tower now. Paris is the city of love, and the Eiffel Tower is the symbol of Paris, the city of love. So I love the Eiffel Tower. And, and I love Paris because I'm a fool for love. And I've said this before, I am the Evel Knievel of love, because I have taken so many risks in my lifetime and crashed spectacularly like Evel Knievel. They said he broke every bone in his body except for his pinky, something like that, But I mean, maybe it's not so healthy to be, such a romantic, such a fool for love, but I am. And maybe that's where my most interesting stories come from. And I definitely have a lot of stories about love stories. And the Eiffel Tower, Gustav Eiffel, I was in Porto, Portugal, and there's this bridge that he did in Porto a few years before he got the commission for the Eiffel Tower. And if you're ever in Porto, Portugal, you'll see it and you'll go like, that's why they chose the guy. That bridge in Porto that Gustav Eiffel made it's spectacular, especially at night when it's all lit up with the lights and everything. It's like a double-decker, iron-clad bridge. It's unbelievable. This guy's imagination, what he did with steel. So, I remember when I was married to Ashna, she had a strict rule. When I go to Paris, I'm not allowed to buy any Eiffel Tower souvenirs. And when I go to Asia, I'm not allowed to buy any Buddha souvenirs, because my apartment's full of Eiffel Towers and Buddhas. Anyway, it's a logical thing to pick up. But when you have 10 or 12 of them, it's time to, find a new souvenir. Anywho, so the first time I came to Paris, like, Parisians do not go to the Eiffel Tower, and they're kind of like snobs about it, that it's such a touristy thing. But of course, non-French, non-Parisian people, you come to Paris and that's the first thing you want to see is, it's not really a trip to Paris, right? So Natalie, when I first came to Paris, 1992, I went there with her and her mom, and they did not want to go to the top of the Eiffel Tower. They were like, oh, this is for tourists. And they chose to stay on this, it's like two bottom levels. If you look at the bottom arcs of the Eiffel Tower itself. And Natalie and her mom said, we'll wait for you in the restaurant and we'll have a coffee or whatever, and you go to the top by yourself. And I remember, I was so young and idealistic. And it's interesting. I think the point I'm trying to make is you go through life and you're looking for signs, man, to show you which way to go and the choices you should make in life. And I think a lot of times signs are bullshit. So I went to the top, and then I saw lovers up there kissing, and I remember thinking, shit, man, there's something symbolic that Natalie didn't want to go to the top of the symbol of love with me. So, that little booger was in my thoughts. But, it turned out to be bullshit, because through the course of my life, after that, I've taken 3 different women to the top of the Eiffel Tower and kissed them. And those relationships didn't work out either. So, so much for looking for signs and everything. It's funny, I'm talking about all the great things that Natalie and her mother turned me on to. Voltaire, Rimbaud. I still love Vivaldi. He's Italian, symphony composer, because Natalie was into him. But also, she loved the short story writer Guy de Maupassant. And everybody, you should read Voltaire's Candide. Everyone should read that book. But also pick up any book you can find by Guy de Maupassant. The most brilliant short stories. Oh, but let me finish the point that I was going to make. A lot of people hated the Eiffel Tower when it was first put up, and and some people wanted it torn down after that 1898 exhibition or whenever it went up. Guy de Maupassant, the writer, hated the Eiffel Tower so much that he ate lunch there every day. And his snobby Parisian quote, he said that he eats at the restaurant at the bottom of the Eiffel Tower every day because it's the only place in Paris where you don't have to look at it. Wah, wah, wah. Anyway, and Maupassant went crazy. I have a biography of his that I've never read because apparently it was a sad ending, but his stories were so inventive. There's one short story, and it's about a soldier on a train, and he's coming back from the war, and he hasn't eaten in weeks, and the guy's starving. And he's in a private box or coach room on a train, cabinet, what do you call it, with this woman, and she'd given birth recently. I forget why the child isn't with her, but and she has to take some trip somewhere. But her breasts are swollen because the baby's not sucking the milk out of it. And from her perspective, she's uncomfortable on this train, and her breasts are causing her all this pain. And then the soldier's perspective, he's like fucking starving to death. And then they get to talking, and then the woman tells the man her problem, the soldier who's starving, and she lets him suck her milk out. Wow. It's kind of hot and steamy. But my favorite Guy de Maupassant story, and I know you can look this up and find it on the internet, it's called Femme Fatale. And it's about this guy and this woman, and they go on vacation in the French countryside by some river. And there's a little island on the river. And the guy's kind of a jerk. He's like a, jock dude, and doesn't really, he's got no tenderness towards women or not his girlfriend anyway. He's just kind of a goon. And there were these lesbians on this island who were vacationing, and everyone's talking, everyone's gossiping about these women. And then the woman his girlfriend knew one of the lesbians on the island. They get in an argument, and she goes to the little island. And, of course, she has a better time with the lesbians than she had with the guy on the vacation. And, yeah, I think he drowned himself in the river. Anyway, femme fatale. It's a hell of a thing. But here's another interesting thing about the read Guy de Maupassant. You'll love it. Another great thing or interesting fact about, the Eiffel Tower, the French invented hot air ballooning, I'm pretty sure. And that was a big craze in the 1880s, 1890s, people going up in hot air balloons. And people knew that flight was possible. I know the Wright brothers are credited with inventing the airplane, but there were contests and German newspapers, American newspapers, like people were putting up big prize money for the person that could invent the first plane. So there was all kind of experimental things going on with aviation. So you can see this on YouTube. I think it's from 1908 or something. Some guy in France, he wanted to fly like a bird, and he had invented these wings that fit on his arms, and feathers on them or whatever. They were designed like wings, and people were into experimenting, and science was pretty popular or whatever. So this guy goes up, not to the top of the Eiffel Tower, but I think that second highest level on those bottom levels, probably the restaurant level where Natalie and her mother were sitting, drinking coffee while I was looking at lovers going, why isn't anybody kissing me at the top of the Eiffel Tower? So this guy goes up onto the Eiffel Tower with these wings, and there's press, there's media there, and movie cameras are new. So someone's filming this. And the guy jumps off with his wings to fly, and he drops like a brick to the bottom and dies. So I think up until that point, in 1908, whatever it was, you could have just shown up at the Eiffel Tower with some wings or a fucking, bunch of balloons tied to, a lawn chair or whatever, and you could have jumped off of it. So that guy ruined it for everybody. Anywho, let's talk about the last time I was in Paris, 2 years ago. I did a show, and there was this amazing woman in the audience. And she was from Cameroon, which is in Africa, if you don't know geography. And, oh my God, she was so pretty. And I talked to her for 2 seconds before the show. She said she was there to work on her English. She wanted to learn English. So she had gone to this comedy show. She heard that going to English language comedy was a good way to learn English. So I was headlining. I did like 30-minute set, and big difference between my skill level and the people who went on before. And I hung out with this woman after the show, and I'll have to say this is probably one of the greatest nights, probably the greatest night I ever had in Paris was with this woman. We came back here to the Regent's Garden Hotel. There's a little restaurant right next door, a little charming little lounge, restaurant, cafe, whatever you want to call it, called Mom, oddly enough. And she didn't speak English, and I don't speak French. So we communicated with the phone, with the Google Translate. And it was really nice going back and forth. And she was divorced. She has 2 kids. She was a hairstylist for, black women's hair, basically. And it was so romantic. And even with the language barrier, and we were going, I'm asking her questions, she's asking me questions. And then it was so beautiful. She said to me at one point, I said, I go, do you, after we hung out for like hour and a half, having a couple of drinks and talking, I said, do you want to go up to my room, or do you want me to call you an Uber? And she said back on the translation, she said, spontaneous moments like this is what make up the greatest moments in your life, to spontaneously connect with somebody and give them all of yourself. She continued saying, and it was just like, oh my God. And we came back up to this hotel and we made love. And even when we were making love, we communicated with the Google Translate a few times. There should be a movie scene. You know, like she was like, could you concentrate on this spot? That's my spot, you know, and it was unbelievable. And she was stunningly beautiful. And I remember like 2 weeks later, she came to Antwerp and she visited me. And we had a great weekend there. And then, this is a couple years ago. And then she actually came to Los Angeles. And it was in February. The weather was terrible. And I wanted to show, she had never been to LA before. And so I was like every day taking her to all these different tourist things. And I was really exhausted. I think what I needed was just to spend time with her, you know, like we had done in Paris. And I felt like the language barrier, like to make jokes. Anyway, I think there's, I broke it off with her. It's unfortunate. That woman from Cameroon, oh my God, she was just, she adored me instantly. And every moment that I spent with her. And covered me with kisses and hugs and just appreciated a good motherfucker. And I think the point I'm trying to make is divorced women don't get enough credit in this world. She was like late 40s and works her ass off all the time. She's a busy mom, and then like seized the fucking moment when she met a guy, me, that she thought was kind and lovable. So, anywho, that's my story. Oh, so this is worth saying. This is also a very important part of that story. So after the woman from Cameroon visited me in Los Angeles, I told my mom, you know, we didn't talk that often either because she was so busy working and being a mother. But I told my mom after that week she visited in February that I was going to break it off with the Cameroon woman in Paris. And my mom said, be ready for her to lash out and be angry at you. And I talked to the woman, and is my fucking sound on? Yeah, there we go. Sorry, just double checking. So my mother said, be prepared for her to be angry and lash out at you, honey. And it was the exact opposite. I told the woman, I said, I don't think I've fully gotten over my last relationship, which was stupid of me to say that, but it was true. And that I didn't want to pursue the relationship. And she said, she was so French the way she handled it. She said, I understand. I could feel you pulling back from me while I was there. And she said, a long time ago, I made the choice in life only to take the best. And I do that with my memories also. And she said, you gave me the best memories. You treated me with dignity and respect. And she said, I have no complaints. And she said, I hope you find what you're looking for. And when I think of you, I will only think of the best moments that we shared together. Wow. What a fucking woman. Anywho. So yeah, let's talk about, can you hear the bell in the distance? My favorite neighborhood, I love the history is so great here. And the French Revolution is one of my historical obsessions. I always thought, how could these political parties hate each other so much that they would chop each other's heads off? And in the last 10 years in the United States, I fully see how it's possible. But the Saint Germain neighborhood, there's so much of the history of the French Revolution. There's a statue of Danton, and Danton was this big guy, one of the revolutionary French Revolution figures, and he was from a farm in the countryside, and he got kicked in the face by a horse when he was a kid. So his face was dented, but he was a big, muscular guy and a badass. But when he got his head cut off during the French Revolution, he told his executioner, he said, "Be sure to hold my head up for the people. It's well worth seeing." Now, if you're about to get your head cut off, you got to say something cool, right? And then so all around the Boulevard Saint Germain, where there's a Danton statue, and then there's this alley. So Robespierre was one of the other main characters of the, I forget what political party he was with, but a lot of people love Robespierre. I think he was kind of a little bitch. He wore this little light blue suit, and he wore a powdered wig, one of those white powdered wigs, 20 years past it being in style. So a lot of people thought that it was Robespierre's, these guys had newspapers and they would write nasty shit about each other. That was their Twitter bitch fights back then. They all had followers and they would work up the people. That's what happened in Rwanda with that genocide. There was a guy on the radio who just got his people all worked up that they went out and started killing. And so these guys did it with newspapers. So Robespierre, I think one of the most fascinating stories of the French Revolution, there was this 19-year-old woman, Charlotte Corday, from Rouen. And she thought, she had read romantic books. She had seen herself as a heroic figure. Her whole life, she knew she was going to do something important. So she knew that it was her opinion, she thought that the revolution turned bloody because of Robespierre. So she had never been to Paris before, and this is before trains. She tells her friends and her family she's leaving, sells whatever possessions she has, and she, by stagecoach gets to Paris, finds where Robespierre lives. The servants won't let her in, so she leaves. She walks around Paris. She buys a knife in a flea market, and then she returned the next day. Oh, so Robespierre, his political party was having a protest somewhere, and these soldiers or people came in and started killing everybody, and Robespierre had to jump into a sewer and wade in human shit for hours until it was safe to crawl out of the sewer. So he was left with this horrible skin condition, and he had to bathe in acid, some kind of special shit every day to some medicine to relieve his pain. So Charlotte Corday returns the second day, and she tells the servants at the door, she said, "Tell Robespierre I have the name of the Jacobins," or whatever the party he hated, of the ones that had fled to Rouen. She has a list of all their names. And he pulls out a piece of paper and a pen, and he says, "Let her in, and I'll have all of their heads cut off in the morning." So Charlotte Corday comes in, and he's in his bathtub, and she sticks the knife in his chest and kills him. And there's a famous painting by David. David became all those famous, beautiful paintings of Napoleon on horseback. David did those, but he was around during the French Revolution also, and he painted this painting of Robespierre. He's in the bathtub, and he's got a piece of paper and a pen in one hand. And I always thought the guy was writing a letter until I read this book on the French Revolution, and he pulled out the pen and paper and said, he was going to make a list of people to be killed when Charlotte Corday killed him. Anywho, so that Saint Germain neighborhood is just full of French Revolution history. All the writers, and there's a American female comedian from Los Angeles. She married a British guy who's a fashion designer, and I met her here years ago. And they had an apartment. They have a home in London and then a home in Paris. And the home is on Saint Sulpice. Saint Sulpice is this church, and then there's this massive fountain on this big square. And that's about a 5-10 minute walk from the Boulevard Saint Germain. It's in the Saint Germain neighborhood, but the area is called Saint Sulpice. So there was a period of about 7 or 8 years. This woman, this comedian friend in Paris, she let me stay in her apartment whenever I would come to Paris. So it's so great. There's the church. There's a church that during the French Revolution, they killed all the priests. And then there's a Cafe Bonaparte. So when I would kind of right across the little cobblestone street there. So when I would come to Paris, this female comedian, who I'll forever be grateful to, she would leave me the key to her apartment with the bartender of the Cafe Bonaparte. And then I get to stay in her apartment. And then when I left, there was a door on that church with a little mail slot in the door. And I would just put the key in there when it was time to go. So awesome having this apartment in Paris. And for this stretch. And Natalie's mother, Annick, this was her favorite area of Paris. So I don't want to say the woman's name because she doesn't do stand-up comedy anymore, and she deserves her privacy. But looking out from one of the windows of their apartment, there's this massive wall, and there's this entire Arthur Rimbaud poem called The Drunken Boat. And I remember first coming to Paris, and Natalie's mother just loved walking around Paris, and she would walk endlessly, and I love walking endlessly. So I remember her giving me a tour and her taking me to show me this, it's in the middle of a city. And there's this wall, and here's this big-ass long poem by Arthur Rimbaud. So through the years learning the story of Rimbaud, it's pretty remarkable. He was from Charleville, France, which is up in the Champagne region or right next to it. He comes to Paris when he's 19, and he becomes this literary sensation. He was Jim Morrison's hero, and Patti Smith always talks about him. So from 19 to 21, he was like the toast of Paris. He's a rock star. And the French poet Paul Verlaine, so Rimbaud was gay, and he had an affair with Paul Verlaine. And Paul Verlaine actually left his wife and 2 kids for Arthur Rimbaud. And they drank absinthe together. They had some bad fights, and they were in Brussels and got into an argument. And I think Verlaine shot Rimbaud in the hand, or Rimbaud shot Verlaine, one or the other. They had this big lovers' quarrel, and one of them shoots the other. And then Verlaine got thrown into prison, and it was this big scandal. And then Paul Verlaine, I don't know how long he was in prison, but he never wrote ever again after that. And when I was in Brussels last December, I was staying in a hotel that was right next to, there was a historical plaque. And that was the hotel where they stayed at, where this happened. Anywho, after this event, and they break up, The Drunken Boat is the heartbroken poem that Arthur Rimbaud wrote about his love story with Paul Verlaine. And there it is on this big fucking wall. And I didn't know that whole story when, because Annick didn't speak English, and we didn't have Google Translate back in the day. And then when Annick died, I know Natalie spread her ashes. She wanted her mother to, her mother had requested for her ashes to be spread around Saint Sulpice and in San Francisco, because those were the places she loved the most. So when I was in Paris in 2009, and I think this is one of my greatest moments in Paris, So this trip I went to the Notre Dame. So they've rebuilt it, and all this old massive paintings that were in the Notre Dame are gone. But if you go to the Saint Sulpice Church, when you go inside, there's all these Delacroix, massive old paintings. I went in there this time, the other day, a few days ago, and there was a service going on. And there was actually like, I'd say a quarter African people, but also the music was joyous. It was the most happy music I've ever heard coming or inside of a Catholic church. The Catholic Church is like, picking up its music game. But anyway, in that Saint Sulpice Church was under construction during the French Revolution, so it's got one tower on the top that's really fancy, and then another tower that's not fancy because the Revolution people were not happy with the church people and didn't want to give up any more money to it. But in front of that church is this massive, beautiful fountain. And when I was in Paris in 2019, I was staying at my friend's apartment there on Saint Sulpice, and it was 108 degrees that day, or 109 degrees, something like that. I remember it was like a heat wave that week, and I remember seeing on the news that this was going to be a record-setting day, the hottest day in history on that day for Paris. And they had health alerts and all this stuff. So my good friend, French comedian who's living in LA now, Noman, I sent him a message and I said, bring your bathing suit over because I'm going to jump in this fountain today. So he comes over. And then there was these Boy Scouts, these French Boy Scouts that they jumped in and they had their uniforms on. It was so hot. And they jumped on the lower level and they were splashing around. And then me and Noman got up to the second level, but there's 3 levels to this big fountain. And I had to, it was tricky climbing up this thing. But I climbed up on top of this fountain and I'm underneath the waterfalls of it. And Noman videotaped it for me and took photos. And I look like a statue. I've got I'm on top of the fountain. And it was like 20 minutes of splashing around and pure joy. And there's this great photo that Noman took of me in the Saint Sulpice Church with the good tower and the, cheaper tower behind me on top of this, fucking beautiful fountain. And that, I think, is probably one of the coolest, greatest things that I did in Paris ever. And do we need a point? Yeah, it was great. I got to, whenever I see that fountain, I'm always reminded of that moment. Oh, that's what I wanted to say. There's a police station. There's a massive police station, like right on the St. Sulpice Square. So I was splashing around for 20 minutes. And then these 2 cops came and they got all the Boy Scouts to get out. They were teenage boys. They're laughing and everything. And they had us get down. And we didn't get fined or anything because I think they understood. It was fucking hot. But I had a good 20 minutes of being on top of this fountain and splashing around. It was beautiful. Okay, I'm going to have to wrap this up shortly because we're getting close to checkout time. What I want to tell you is it's never been an easier time to travel. And there's never been a better time to experience Paris with modern technology. Like I was saying, Google Translate, that beautiful story I had with the Cameroonian woman to be able to communicate with the phone. That didn't exist years ago when I was spending hours talking to Natalie's mother and we were drawing pictures on paper and, making gestures to try to communicate. But also with Uber. Back in the old days, you have to take a taxi in Paris and, they could drive way out of the way. But Uber, you agree on the price beforehand. And then there's tons of Uber drivers, and they dress really nicely in Paris. I like that most of the taxi cabs are Toyota Camrys in Paris. But also there's this new app, and the Parks Department of Paris put it out, and it's a French Revolution app. And when you're walking around Paris, it can give you the history of when you look at the map of Paris, wherever you are, and then it, tells you where these historic things happened. Like where Robespierre had to, soak in human shit for several hours in a sewer and those kind of things. So my best travel tips, I'm here in summer now. I remember there was a few years when I came to Paris in summer, and I wanted to see the catacombs, where all these like human skulls and bones are in these underground tunnels in Paris. When you go in summer, you have to wait in line. I went twice and waited in line for hours and was turned away. So another trip, I was in Paris in December, in winter, and there was no line at all. And I had, could take my time. It's interesting when you go down into those tunnels into the catacombs of Paris, there's a sign that says, "We once were as you are now," meaning among the living. So you got to enjoy your days. But one part of enjoying your days is do not go to the museums in summer when you come to Paris. It's just, crowded with tourists. The times to go to the museums and the catacombs, the best time to see that kind of stuff is in winter when there's not a lot of tourists in the city. In the summer, I say go to Père Lachaise Cemetery and go to the parks. There's this Luxembourg Gardens. It's near where the Pantheon is, and the Pantheon has got all the famous French writers are buried there, like Voltaire and Victor Hugo and all those kind of people. So right in that area, there's these massive gardens, and this was only for the royalty before. That's why the citizens of France and Paris were starving to death outside of these walls, and the aristocrats and royal people are all walking around in their fancy clothes and in these gardens. But there's a statue there. I think it's one of the most beautiful things in Paris, and it's this. There's a young woman reclining on a young man. They're obviously lovers. She's sleeping, or I don't know if she's ill or what, but she's, she's limp and resting in this man's, he's holding her. And clearly the way he's looking at her and he's holding her, he loves her. And it is one of the most stunningly beautiful statues ever. Just to look at this couple, it just completely symbolizes love. But there's this long canal in front of it. And then when you walk further away from this statue, you see there's these rock formations around it and above it. And above these young lovers on this rock is this kind of ogre monster looking dude. So like there's always a threat to any love story or any, tender situation. But in the summer, go to these parks. And one of my number one tips for Paris is always Storer, Stohrer. It's the oldest patisserie in Paris. I love fruit tarts. On my birthday, all I want is a fruit tart with a candle on it and someone to tell me they love me. Fruit tarts are one of my favorite things on the planet Earth. And Storer is on Rue Montaguy, which is one of the greatest pedestrian walking food streets. There's like 4 boulangeries, there's produce stands, there's like 2 cheese shops. It's pretty spectacular. And right across this little paved walking path of the street, right across from Storer, is this little cafe, and it's called Le Compass, or The Compass. And there, the drinks there and the coffees, €1, €2 more than other places, but I think it's one of the best places to sit and people watch in all of Paris. And there's a historical marker like half a block up that Balzac's Human Comedy, his famous work, some important part of that book happened there in that area on that street. Do you remember this joke that I used to do? I was originally invited to perform in Paris because they heard that my specialty was talking about the French novelist Balzac. But when I got there, they found out my specialty was talking about my ballsack. Oh, this is quite a difference. So, Storer, one thing changed this trip. They used to put out these amazing sandwiches at lunchtime. Now they still have sandwiches, but they're like, they were wrapped in plastic. They had on top of the counter, they had just unbelievable chicken and avocado sandwiches on baguettes. Everything tastes good on a baguette. But that and, for restaurants in Paris, on the Boulevard Saint-Germain, I was talking about the Danton statue. So where the Danton statue is, right beside it, on this corner of Saint-Germain Boulevard and the side street, is a little cafe restaurant, and it's called Danton, or the Danton Cafe. So right behind that, there are two little thin restaurants. And there's only like 5 stools at the bar. There's a long bar. And then if you go there at a certain point in the evening, it's full and people are standing. But the menu items are hanging from the ceiling. And so it's all kind of tapas style, little small portions. But so one of the places specializes in meat and pork dishes. There's like a beef croquette thing there that's unbelievable. And then the little thin one right next door to it is for fish and seafood. And I remember staying in that Saint Sulpice apartment, that American female comedian who was so kind to let me stay there. She told me this was her favorite restaurant. So Ashna and I, when we used to come to Paris, and we didn't have much money, we were always kind of traveling on a budget. And that was like the big splurge thing for us to, I think it's called La Comptoir or something like that. But just, and it's not that expensive, but it's just so fucking good. And that little side road goes to Saint Sulpice Church from Boulevard Saint-Germain. But if you find that Danton Cafe, it's immediately right behind it on that left side of the road. And then up adjacent on the other side of the road is a famous cafe called La Editeurs, where writers and journalists and all these people used to and still hang out in Paris. But so La Comptoir, Storer, and then for hotels, this hotel where I'm staying, the Regent's Garden, is a part of this boutique hotel chain, and it's called Astotel, Astotel. So look up astotel.com or Astotel Hotels in Paris. And they own 15, 20 different little boutique hotels around Paris. About 10 years ago, Gad Elmaleh, the famous French comedian, he's of Moroccan descent, beautiful guy. He had moved to New York and he wanted to do stand-up comedy in English, and then he made a Netflix special. And there was a year period after this where Gad and some production company were bringing comedians once a month to perform at this theater, La Oeuvre, whatever, like an artist or a writer's body of work over their career is their oeuvre. I don't know how to pronounce it properly, but it's Theater La Oeuvre. And it's a beautiful little theater, seats 300 people. It was a balcony, it was sold out. For performing, that was my greatest highlight in Paris. And I've always dreamed, and I will do this one day, I want to film a stand-up comedy special there. And it was such a great audience. And I think there was no opener. It was just me for an hour plus. And it was just a magical experience. So when I flew over to do that, so that that theater's famous. There was a playwright called Alfred Jarry. Really interesting guy. He drank absinthe. He was a wild man. He just wanted to stay fucked up all the time. And bicycles were big in the late 1800s. And I guess you could carry pistols like the cowboy days. So this guy rode his bike around Paris getting drunk, and he would occasionally shoot up a bar with his pistols. But he wrote some play, and it's called, I think, Ubu Roy. And it's about some king that's just given unlimited power. And he's not that smart. And he just sends all these people to die in war. And but the first sentence of this play was put on at Theatre La Ovra in whatever the year was, 1898 or 1880 something. I don't know. So the opening line of the play was the word med, which means shit. So the opening, and so the French theater at the time was so proper, and there was etiquette. This was so obscene. We can't even comprehend now what this was like. That the people rioted in this theater. They started breaking chairs and just they tore the place up. They were so upset by this one word. But anyway, kind of cool history with that theater. And I'm really proud that I played there. My greatest performance highlight of Paris. And then Gad Elmala's company, this production company that arranged all this, they put me in a small, cool hotel in that neighborhood where that theater was. And it was part of that Estodal boutique hotel group. And that's how I discovered this. So in the last 10 years, when I come to Paris, I've stayed at a few different properties. And then I think this is my third or fourth time in the last however many years of staying at the Regent's Garden Hotel. And it's about a 10-minute walk from the Arc de Triomphe. When I arrived last Saturday from Dublin, the finish line of the Tour de France was at the Arc de Triomphe, but my plane arrived a couple hours late. Anyway, I'm not complaining. I have the best life ever. Okay, so let me wrap this up by telling you another wonderful Paris experience I had like 2 nights ago. So Natalie, we stayed friends all these years. She's so important to me. She's such a good person. She married a French guy named Patrick. He's a wonderful guy. And there was this French painter artist woman that Natalie was friends with named Sylvie. And I haven't seen her in years. But when we lived in San Francisco, she came and stayed with us for like 3 months while she looked for an apartment. And then she lived there for a while. And then Sylvie lived in Marseille for years. And now she's living in Deauville in Normandy. And she's a painter. That's her life. She's painted since she was a kid. That's what she does. And Natalie there was a little dinner party at Marie's house. And Marie is Natalie's oldest best friend from like junior high school. And I've, known her and seen her through the years. Wonderful person who doesn't speak that much English. And I remember she translated a couple times for me and Natalie's mother. And I knew, I'd tell some big long story and then she'd say like 2 words. And I'm like, I didn't tell 2 words. I told a story. Anyway, so Marie had a little soiree at her little Parisian apartment. And they asked me, bring some food, bring whatever you want to drink. And everybody brought, I brought a watermelon and cheeses. And oh my God, there's this creme brulee chocolate here that Lindt makes. Only place I've ever seen it is in Switzerland and France. And it's chocolate with creme brulee in it. Oh my God, it's so good. So anyway, we came and just had the most wonderful, hadn't, seen Marie in years, hadn't seen Sylvie in over 20 years. And it was a proper Parisian evening. We ate and hung out and talked. When I first got together with Natalie, I was such a small town Florida hillbilly. And my family, would all eat fast. Because if you didn't eat fast, you wouldn't get enough pizza. And I think I still eat too fast. But with Natalie, I learned that the meal is part of it. A meal with people is conversation and connecting, and so that's one of the greatest things Natalie taught me, is just to not fucking eat so fast, and enjoy an evening with people together. And we had the most wonderful evening, catching up, telling stories, and at the end of the night, Marie brought out this like wooden music box. And then she had a suitcase full of these little books that folded, and there was like all these punch holes on it. So each book was a song. This was invented in Italy. She said, like, Patrick looked it up. It's invented, I don't know, 1862, something like that. And you feed the book pages, all unfold like a triptych, and you feed it into the thing, and you crank this crank. And then it plays the music. And so like this, imagine when this first came out, this was like the first, iPhone or iPad or Sony Walkman. Like, oh my God, portable music. You don't need an entire band or an orchestra. So there are all these like kind of classic old French songs, and Marie's so proud of this thing. And I really enjoyed the moment that she pulled out this this ancient music box. And Natalie and Sylvie, I don't know if it was the wine, they couldn't stop laughing. And they were making fun of Marie's music box. And it was such a French moment where Marie just, she says in French, she's like, no, this is serious. And no, she's like reprimanding them to both, please show some respect, show some. And then Marie would feed in another songbook, punch card tablet thing, and start cranking it. And they were just pissing themselves with laughter. And part of me was sympathetic with Marie, because I would have, been a little irked by that also. But just seeing Natalie and her friend Sylvie laughing so fucking hard. And it was really a beautiful evening. And, I don't regret now, for years I thought, oh, I should have stayed with Natalie. I should have stayed with this woman or Ashna or whatever. But, some people you were just meant to be friends with, and the connections you have. It's funny, when I was younger and Natalie and I were breaking up, I remember thinking, I'm losing her and her mother. No, I never lost these people. They were some of my closest, greatest friends throughout life. We just weren't meant to be in a relationship together. But we still, to this day, have so much love for each other and so much compassion and respect. And, I'm a better human being because I've known these people in my life. Anyway, all right. I got about 8 minutes until I need to check out of the Regent's Garden Hotel. Right around the corner from here, there's a little cafe called Dada. And the Dada art group, they did plays, they did paintings. They were based in Zurich, I believe. They were persecuted by their government, but they were a really radical artist group called Dada. I'm guessing that's where the cafe took its name from. But the thing that always stuck in my brain, something I read years ago about the Dada art movement, they said, Dada respects nothing but the urge to burst out laughing. Like when they were asked, like, what's the meaning? What's the purpose of the Dada art movement? Dada respects nothing but the urge to burst out laughing. I always really liked that. And then I got to go to the airport. I'm flying to Budapest. I've been looking forward to this all year. I've been looking forward to this. Doing Dublin last week, Paris this week, and then Budapest. Paris last week, and then Budapest this week. So I'll end this here. Voltaire, that's interesting because Voltaire, he would write articles. Him and oh my God, who did he had a big rivalry with some guy, and he was with Rousseau. Yeah, it was Rousseau, and they used to write nasty criticisms about each other. Voltaire wrote that when I read Rousseau, I feel like I'm de-evolving and don't want to walk, I want to crawl. That's how like primitive and stupid Rousseau's writing was. But you know, back in those days, if the government and the people didn't like what a author wrote in a book or a newspaper, they would burn the books. And if they really didn't like it, they would burn the author. And Rousseau had to go to Switzerland, and Voltaire ended up moving to Switzerland also to avoid getting in trouble or murdered or whatever. But Voltaire, even though he hated Rousseau, the line that he wrote about him, even though I disagree with what you were saying, I will defend with my life your right to say that. And Voltaire was talking about a guy he considered his enemy when he wrote that, and you hear that often quoted. But the quote I'm going to end this episode on, Voltaire had all these followers, and when he would write letters to his followers, he would end the letters by saying, "Advance onward towards truth, my brothers, while always laughing under your breath." All right. It's enough for now. Next time I talk to you, I'll be in Budapest. Hooray for humanity. Do something nice for somebody. Okay, now I'm in Budapest, and I just had to add this one last little part for the Paris episode. So I called an Uber from the Regent's Garden Hotel to go to the airport to fly to Budapest. And when the Uber arrived, it was this older French man, probably like in his 60s, and he put my big bag in the trunk of his car, and I had my carry-on piece. And, you know, a lot of times I like to, you know, keep it with me because it's got my computer and, your valuable things. So right before he was about to close the hatchback on his Kia, I thought, what the fuck, I'll just put it in the back. And so I lean in to put my carry-on bag into the back trunk hatchback space, and I smacked my head on the edge of the trunk of the hatchback. And I got this gash, and I was bleeding on the way to the airport. And, I'm in Europe. I want to, I'm getting older. I want to try to hold on to what little tiny bit of handsomeness I have left. And then I got a big fucking bloody gash on my forehead, and I got to go to the airport. So the Uber driver, this older man, was so kind. About halfway from the hotel to Charles de Gaulle Airport, he pulled over at a gas station, and he went in and he bought some Band-Aids. And he came out, and he gave me a Kleenex, and I was holding it on my forehead up until that point. And then the kind older man actually put the Band-Aid on my forehead, and he called it a compress. So I think that's the French word for Band-Aid. But it was such a little kind moment. You know, if the guy was an asshole, you always hear about how rude French people are. It happens once in a while. It happens everywhere. But I don't find French people ruder than anyone else. And I thought it was a really kind moment. So that also reminded me of a story I did not tell. Something that happened to me about 3 or 4 nights ago, right in front of this Regent's Garden Hotel spot also. So, oh my God, I had this pop-up on my phone. I don't have my phone set to any, fitness things or how many miles you walk. But this window popped up about 3 or 4 days ago. And it said for the last 7 days, I have averaged walking 8.4 miles. I mean, I have walked myself silly, and my feet have been hurting. So, a lot of nights I've just gone back to the hotel to relax and rest. So I'm sorry to say, but I started smoking cigarettes again. Please don't tell my mom. And I was standing in front of the hotel. It's about 8 p.m., And, the sun doesn't really go down in Europe now or everywhere until like, almost 9 p.m. It's still light out. So it was still pretty light out. It was about 8 p.m. I'm standing in front of the hotel smoking. And this guy in a suit with no tie on comes up to me and he says something in French. And his lip was busted. His whole lip was bloody, and he had like kind of blood between the cracks of his teeth, and he had a big bruise on his lower right jaw, and his lip was all busted. And he said something in French, and I said, "Parlez-vous anglais?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "Can I have a cigarette?" And so I said, "Of course." I give him a cigarette. And he looked pretty shaken. He looked like a guy who had just gotten into a fight. And I said, "Do you need a light?" And he says, "Yes." And so I give him the lighter, and he holds up his hand to light the cigarette. And I could see that his the bottom palm of his hand was all cut, and he had blood running down his arm. And the guy's kind of shaking a little bit as he lights the cigarette. So he tells me, he said he was at this restaurant about a block away, and he got into a fight with this man. And the man had friends, and all the friends jumped on him and really gave him a good beating. And I was like, holy shit, man. And it seemed like, I thought maybe this guy was, he had heroically fought all these guys. And so I had sympathy for him. And I said, "Jesus, brother, here." And I pulled out another cigarette and I put it behind his ear. I said, "Here, brother, take this for later." And then I was telling him, I said, "When you get home, you should put some ice on that." And I patted on my jaw to show where his jaw was all bruised. I said, "When you get home, you should put some ice on that." And he didn't understand ice. And I said, "Cold. When you get home, you should put some cold." And he goes, "Ah." So he got it. And right at that moment, this really huge, massive man in a suit, he said he was a plainclothes police. He said police. He said, "I'm the police." And it's funny. It's interesting because, I've been studying French whenever I can, trying to learn the language as much as I can. And I could understand this guy say, "I'm the police." He said, you had some trouble at this restaurant over there. And then this guy says something, and then I understand the cop to say, "It's all on camera." And then I realized that this guy who I thought maybe was the hero actually might have been the troublemaker. And so I started lightly backstepping into the courtyard of the Regent's Garden Hotel, and I let that story play out and have its moment. Oh, so I wanted to say another thing about Natalie's husband, Patrick. I mean, I love that I'm still great friends with most of my ex-girlfriends and stuff. And you have to commend the boyfriends or husbands of these women for allowing this friendship and not being jealous or bothered. But I really like Patrick, and he's written several books about how the brain works. I think one of them is, it's apparently we have reptilian brains, and we still make choices from our reptilian brains. And he was talking at that dinner party the other night about how we have these experiences when we're younger, and then we decide that something is the best. Like if you have a Coca-Cola or a hot dog and, with your mom or your dad or somewhere in some situation, and that's why it's imprinted in your mind for the rest of your life that that's the best version of that product. And that's interesting because in my mind, Veuve Clicquot champagne is the greatest champagne because Natalie's mother took me to Reims and we had a glass of it, my first trip to France. So I would have to agree with that assessment that, it was stamped in my mind at that moment that was the greatest champagne. So a couple of little things I want to just add before we wrap this up. French people drive really slow. And when I came here, 2022, and I took this trip and I rented a car, I was see these people are all driving slow on the highway. I was going to Monet's Gardens, where he painted all the lily pads. And I just started passing people, and I'm laughing. I'm rocking down the highway, and I'm thinking to myself, I kept saying, this is how we do it in California, baby. And I'd pass like 5 cars at a time. But then I got back to Los Angeles, and I had 5 speeding tickets because they don't have cops in France that pull you over when you're speeding. They have police speed cameras, and then they just mail you the ticket. And I hope that never comes to the United States. And I think that's one of the best things about America, is you can haul ass on the highway, and if there's no cops, you can get away with it. Oh yes, Monet's Gardens, that was no big deal. Near there is where Vincent van Gogh and his brother Theo is buried. I was happy that I saw that once in my life. And then I went to, this is when I was here in 2022, suffering heartbreak. I gave myself this trip, and I went to Mont Saint Michel. And I would say skip that, or just only do it in half a day. I slotted out 2 days there, and I was bored silly, and I was not aware until I was there that Mont Saint Michel was actually a prison during the French Revolution. And it had all kinds of bad vibes. I couldn't wait to get the fuck out of there. But I was happy I got to go to Notre Dame while I was here. That relationship that I had that really floored me. I met the woman in 2019, and the weekend, you know what I'm talking about. The weekend, this woman and I got together on the Monday, was when Notre Dame caught on fire and burned. And so I think it's interesting, 5 years later, 6 years later, that it's rebuilt and open. So, keep that in mind. If you get your heart broken, you have some devastating setback, that you can rebuild your church. And the Notre Dame is a great symbol of that, you can make it better than it was before, baby. So, speaking of the French Revolution, something I just want to add about all this historical stuff that I know. I read this biography on Napoleon a few years ago, and I know I did a big podcast when I read the book, because I love doing podcasts about books that I read. Napoleon became the dictator to end the French Revolution. And, the French Revolution, it started out noble, and, they overthrew the monarchy and all the religious people. But then it was like, it wouldn't end. And these people were just, they wouldn't go back to work. They couldn't produce things. They just wanted to set shit on fire and guillotine people. And Napoleon rose through the ranks, and they made him the leader because he was violent, and he cracked down on all these mobs. There's this one instance when there was like 300 or 400 people on a bridge in Paris. And I think he was only like a captain or something at that point. But he set up cannons on both sides of the bridge. These people were, revolution people protesting. And he had his soldiers fire on them with their rifles and the cannons, and they murdered like 300 people, something like that. And that was the event that put Napoleon on the map and started his upward trajectory towards dictatorship, because, the fucking violence and craziness wouldn't end. And, they thought this guy could restore order. And that's basically what he did. Big important thing I want to tell you before I wrap this up is, and I know I've said this many times through the years, you've probably heard it, but, Natalie, I was so happy to see Natalie. It's so great to hear her laugh again and see her happy. And that dinner party with her friends and her husband definitely was one of the highlights of my trip to Paris. But I think it's worth remembering that when Natalie and I were together, you know, she was 5 years older than me. We moved to San Francisco. I was 22. She was 27. She gave me this book, and I still have it to this day. And it's called Love is an Action. And I remember, like, when she gave me the book, I remember almost feeling kind of offended. Like, you know, you don't need a book to know about love. Like, love is natural, like a flower opening, right? You know, when you're in your 20s and your 30s, you think you fucking know everything, when you really know absolutely nothing. And anyway, about, I don't know, 10 years after the relationship with Natalie ended, I finally read this book. And it's a thin book, and it's a great book. And basically what it says is love is an action. It's not a word. That you can say you love flowers all day long, every day. You can tell everybody you meet that you love flowers. If you don't get your flowers sunshine and water, you don't really love flowers, because love is an action. It's not a word. You can say who you are, what you do, the kind of person you are, but you can only be judged by your actions, and other people also. So keep that in mind, you know, in your relationships with your family, with your friends, and especially your love partner, that, you know, love is an action. It's something people do. It's not something that they say. And if people aren't giving you the love action, cut them out of your fucking life. Okay, that's it. Next week's episode will be from Budapest. And hooray for humanity. And thanks for letting me add this little piece at the end. Viva la humanité, as they say en français.